North Korea, South Korea. The Korean Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, is one of the most tense places on Earth. It runs for about 155 miles across the Korean peninsula and is roughly 2.5 miles wide. At first glance, it might look peaceful, green hills, forests, and rivers. But hidden beneath that calm are layers of barbed wire, minefields, and soldiers who are always on high alert. The DMZ was created in 1953, when the Korean War ended with a ceasefire, not a peace treaty. That means North and South Korea are still technically at war. Over the decades, both sides have built up massive defenses. Watchtowers stand every few hundred meters, armed with machine guns. Loudspeakers blast propaganda messages across the border. Beneath the ground, there are tunnels, some discovered, some still unknown, that North Korea dug to send troops into the south. Tension here never really goes away. In 2015, a landmine exploded in the southern part of the DMZ, injuring 2 South Korean soldiers. South Korea responded by resuming loudspeaker broadcasts, and North Korea fired artillery shells in retaliation. In 2017, a North Korean soldier made a desperate dash across the border under a hail of gunfire from his own army. He was rescued by South Korean troops, barely alive. Any small mistake here could spark a conflict that would pull in global powers like the US and China or other world powers. It is a strip of land where peace exists only because neither side dares to start the war that everyone fears. India, Pakistan. The Kashmir region is one of the most contested places in the world, and the border here, known as the Line of Control, has been a flashpoint for over 75 years. It cuts through steep mountains, icy rivers, and dense forests, dividing the land between India and Pakistan. Both nations claim Kashmir as their own, and both have fought multiple wars over it since 1947, the year they became independent from British rule. This border is unlike most others. In some stretches, soldiers on opposite sides are so close they can see each other's faces through binoculars. In the high-altitude areas, the air is thin, temperatures drop far below freezing, and snow can block passes for months. Yet the military presence never leaves. Ceasefires have been agreed to, and broken, countless times. Exchanges of gunfire and mortar shells are so common that civilians in nearby villages have learned to tell the difference between the sounds of incoming and outgoing fire. Schools close when shelling begins. Families sometimes spend nights sleeping in underground shelters, waiting for the fighting to stop. In 1999, the Kargil War brought the world's attention back to this dangerous border. Pakistani troops and militants crossed into Indian territory and occupied mountain peaks, forcing Indian forces into a bloody battle at extreme altitudes. The fighting took place on icy cliffs, where soldiers had to climb while under heavy fire. Even today, the Line of Control remains one of the most militarized borders on Earth. And because both countries have nuclear weapons, any escalation here carries the terrifying risk of a much bigger, far deadlier conflict. Russia, Ukraine. The border between Russia and Ukraine has become one of the most dangerous places on the planet since February 24, 2022, when Russia launched a full-scale invasion. Before that day, it was already tense, with low-level fighting in eastern Ukraine since 2014. But now, much of this border has turned into an active war zone, stretching hundreds of kilometers. There is no fence or clear boundary here anymore, only shifting front lines. In some areas, the border is marked by trenches, craters, and destroyed buildings. Entire towns have been flattened by artillery barrages. Fields that once grew wheat are now filled with mines and unexploded shells. Roads are scarred with tank tracks and littered with burnt-out vehicles. Cities like Kharkiv, Mariupol, and Donetsk have endured relentless bombardment. Civilians live under the constant threat of missile strikes, drone attacks, and sudden offensives. Air raid sirens can sound at any moment, and those few minutes to find shelter often mean the difference between life and death. Millions have fled across safer borders into Poland, Romania, and other countries. Many others have stayed, living in basements or underground bunkers for weeks at a time. Crossing this border is nearly impossible for ordinary people. It is patrolled not by guards and checkpoints, but by soldiers in combat, artillery batteries, and armed drones. Until the war ends, this will remain one of the most lethal borders anywhere in the world. Israel, Gaza, Westbank. In 2025, the border around Gaza is part of an active war zone. Israel's military is pushing deeper into the territory, with plans to take full control of Gaza City and other areas. The fighting has caused massive destruction, and airstrikes continue almost daily. Entire neighborhoods have been flattened, and hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. The humanitarian situation is severe. Gaza's health authorities report tens of thousands of civilian deaths since the war escalated in 2023. Food, water, and medicine are in short supply, and many aid deliveries are blocked or delayed. International agencies warn of famine conditions in some areas. The conflict has also reached international courts after genocide allegations were made against Israel. The International Court of Justice ordered Israel to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza and to avoid actions that could breach the Genocide Convention. At the International Criminal Court, arrest warrants have been issued for Israel's prime minister and defense minister over alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. Meanwhile, talks are underway in Qatar, Egypt, and the United States to try to reach a ceasefire and a hostage exchange. But on the ground, the border is still an active conflict zone, with ongoing fighting and no clear sign of when it will end. Sudan, South Sudan. The border between Sudan and South Sudan runs through remote areas with poor infrastructure and little government presence. When South Sudan became independent in 2011, it was supposed to end decades of civil war. Instead, new disputes began almost immediately, especially over the oil-rich region of Abyei, which both countries claim. Armed clashes between government forces, local militias, and ethnic groups are still common. Seasonal migrations by herders often cross the border, leading to fights over grazing land and water. In some areas, entire villages have been emptied after raids or fighting. Refugees move back and forth depending on where the violence flares, and aid workers face serious risks trying to reach them. Roads here are few and often impassable in the rainy season. Supplies are limited, and basic services like healthcare and clean water are scarce. Even during official ceasefires, tensions stay high, and it doesn't take much for fighting to start again. For the people living in these borderlands, the danger is constant, and peace has never truly arrived. Afghanistan-Pakistan. Afghanistan-Pakistan border, known as the Durand Line, cuts through mountains, valleys, and tribal lands. It was drawn by the British in 1893 and has been disputed ever since. The rugged terrain and lack of strong government control make it one of the most difficult borders in the world to secure. Militant groups, including the Taliban and Islamic State affiliates, move across it to launch attacks on both sides. Pakistan has built fences, watchtowers, and new checkpoints, but the remote passes are almost impossible to patrol fully. Smuggling of weapons, drugs, and goods is common, often using the same mountain trails that fighters use. Border villages live with the constant risk of airstrikes, raids, and gun battles between militants and security forces. In some areas, tribal communities have stronger ties across the border than to either national government, making enforcement even harder. For people here, the danger at the border from conflict and instability is part of everyday life. United States-Mexico. The United States-Mexico border stretches for nearly 2,000 miles, crossing deserts, rivers, and busy urban areas. While some sections are relatively calm, others are among the most dangerous in the Americas due to the influence of powerful drug cartels. In states like Tamaulipas, Sonora, and Sinaloa, rival criminal groups fight over smuggling routes into the United States. These routes are used for drugs, weapons, and human trafficking, and the violence often spills into nearby towns. Shootouts can happen in broad daylight, and kidnappings are a constant threat in certain regions. Migrants attempting to cross face additional dangers. In the desert, extreme heat and lack of water have claimed many lives. The Rio Grande, which forms part of the border, can be deceptively dangerous, with strong currents that have led to numerous drownings. On top of the physical risks, criminal gangs sometimes target migrants for extortion or forced labor. Even with heavy patrols, walls, and surveillance technology, the violence in some stretches remains high. Ethiopia, Eritrea. The border between Ethiopia and Eritrea has been shaped by decades of hostility. From 1998 to 2000, the two countries fought a brutal war that left tens of thousands dead. The fighting was over disputed territory, including the town of Badme, and the front lines were heavily mined and fortified. In 2018, a peace agreement briefly reopened the border, allowing families to reunite and trade to resume. But the optimism didn't last. The outbreak of the Tigray conflict in northern Ethiopia in 2020 pulled Eritrean troops into the fighting, and reports of cross-border raids and attacks followed. The border area is remote, with few roads and little international access. This isolation makes it hard to confirm events, but tensions remain high. Both sides maintain military positions, and clashes still occur from time to time. For civilians in nearby towns and villages, the risk of renewed conflict is never far away, and the legacy of past wars is still felt in everyday life. China, India. The border between China and India runs through some of the highest mountains in the world in the Himalayan region. Known as the line of actual control, it is not clearly marked on the ground, and both countries disagree on exactly where it lies. The terrain is extreme, altitudes above 2,500 miles, freezing temperatures, and narrow mountain passes make movement difficult and dangerous. Soldiers on both sides live in isolated outposts, facing months of harsh weather and thin air. Despite an agreement not to use firearms in the area, clashes have still turned deadly. In June 2020, a fight in the Galwan Valley involving rocks, sticks, and improvised weapons left dozens of soldiers dead. Since then, both sides have increased troop numbers and built more infrastructure, including roads and airstrips, to strengthen their positions. The dispute has deep historical roots, dating back to border agreements from the colonial era. Tensions can rise quickly, and even a small patrol encounter can turn into a serious standoff. Somalia, Kenya. The border between Somalia and Kenya runs through dry, sparsely populated land, much of it far from central government control. For years, it has been a front line in Kenya's fight against the militant group Al-Shabaab. The group regularly carries out cross-border raids, bombings, and ambushes, targeting security forces as well as civilians. Kenya has responded with military patrols, airstrikes, and the construction of a border barrier. But the frontier is long and difficult to secure, with many remote crossings that are hard to monitor. Smuggling and informal trade still happen in these areas, often using the same routes militants use. Border towns live with constant security warnings, and schools, markets, and buses have all been targeted in past attacks. Humanitarian work is risky, as aid convoys can be attacked or looted. For people living here, the threat is always present, and stability in the region depends heavily on the wider conflict inside Somalia. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.